1. My brother was in the Air Force. Met this girl near his base. Eventually got his discharge and moved back to be closer to home. Because he'd met his fiancée while he was living away, I didn't know her very well. Just what he told me about her, but he was clearly in love, and that's all that mattered to me. I wasn't the one marrying her. We don't have a lot of extended family, and my brother and I have always been close. So as plans began to take shape, my sister-in-law-to-be kindly invites me to join the wedding party, as a bridesmaid, even though we didn't know one another well. I made it clear that while I was honored, she needn't feel obligated, because I understood the bridesmaids were primarily her immediate family, and close lifetime friends, a few sorority sisters, some gals from high school, and a favorite co-worker, were the others on her roster if I recall correctly. But she welcomed me with open arms, so I gladly accepted and tried to do my part to make the wedding exactly as she imagined. It turns out that was a taller order than I could ever have anticipated. As the date drew closer, the bride began to make some pretty hefty demands. The maid of honor calculated how much her full wish list would cost, and it came to over $85,000. And that wasn't even factoring in the honeymoon. So I thought, whew, neither of them had jobs for most of last year. That'll be a tough nut to crack. Glad I'm not my brother right now. And kind of sat back in my heels, gawking in amazement and looking forward to attending an $85,000 party for the first and likely only time in my life. Now, my brother's a hard worker, but he's not rich, and his bride-to-be works part-time only. So I checked with him and asked if he was really prepared to spend that much money, or if he'd come into some money he didn't tell us about or something. He explained that his bride-to-be was one of those girls who'd always grown up dreaming of her wedding day, and she was dead set on the notion that this was going to be the single best day of her life, and nothing would ever top it, so they had to go all out. Basically, what he was explaining to me is they were both blowing through their savings and accepting help from our parents in order to realize her fairy tale wedding. I thought that was dumber than a box of rocks, but hey, it's their wedding and their life, not my place to boss them around. Considering the scope, the planning was becoming so momentous that the maid of honor would gather us every week or two for strategy meetings. I mostly stayed quiet at these and looked for straightforward ways to help, rather than taking the lead on any particular areas. I let people who knew her better handle the more individualized aspects of planning. As a result, the big decisions, like where to have the bachelorette party or what kind of presents to get her, were usually directed by a close friend. Then someone would let me know, hey, can you call this vendor and reserve X amounts of these? Can you check with this day spa and see if they have availability for all of us? Can you look next time you're at their place and see if she still needs a new dishwasher, etc. I don't mind at all, because I knew I was contributing more doing the menial tasks than I would be trying to take on the creative end, as I really didn't know her all that well. But I was quickly taken off even doing that much because my sister-in-law-to-be insisted I request military discounts from all the vendors and stores, even though there were items for the bridal party, paid for by us civilians, and she, the bride, has never served in the military. So I felt kind of uncomfortable reaping the benefits of the discount when no service members would be utilizing the products. The bridal party, none of who served either, got frustrated with the extra money that kept appearing on my invoices due to my lack of willingness to request military discounts, and I was demoted to basically an audience member or cheerleader, frankly fine by me. This whole thing had really started eating into my time. If you're wondering how so many meetings and so much money could have gone into our end of planning this wedding, when surely they had a wedding planner, it's because on top of the ceremony itself, there were about 5 separate bridal parties scheduled, including the bachelorette party. There was a spa trip, there was a big celebratory clubbing night after she went dress shopping. There were all these celebrations that had to be just so. One of the hallmarks of the actual wedding ceremony was uniformity. We were all getting our hair styled the same. Women with long hair were getting dramatic trims, ones with short hair were getting extensions out of their own pocket. Everyone ordered custom-length heels so we'd all be 5'4", I'm an inch shorter than the bride, on the day of the ceremony. The two women who were taller than 5'4" agreed to crouch down an inch or two in photos and during all the public-facing moments of the ceremony. I thought the bride was joking about this until she had them start practicing it. There was so much going on in terms of appointments I had to make for myself, parties I had to plan and participate in. And you know, my own life that I led, that I basically just focused on getting my tasks complete and stopped tracking what was being put on the books. At a point when things really picked up at my work and with my kids' schooling, I missed a few planning meetings. You'd have thought I bailed on testifying before Congress the way they reacted. So one day I get a disapproving reminder text from the maid of honor telling me to be at a specific address at a certain time, coupled with a passive-aggressive PS that she was only reminding me because I'd missed the last several meetings. I told her that I would be there, and she basically replied that I better be because this one was extra important and couldn't be made up later. I arrive and find we're at a tattoo parlor. My brother's bride has a fair number of tattoos, so I figured she was getting a new one to commemorate the wedding, and the bridesmaids were somehow involved. I had gotten an email about a design a couple weeks prior, but hadn't looked very closely, because that word gets thrown around a lot in event planning. I replied, just saying whatever she wanted was fine without opening any of the files. I realized maybe they were designing a custom tattoo for her. Made sense. A few of her other bridesmaids were also pretty heavily inked. So we walk in, and everyone is gushing with excitement. I thought it was so sweet, and I offered to take photos. Like I suspected, the bride was getting a tattoo. It was wedding rings styled like a pin on a map, demarcating the town in our state where they'd met, and were now getting married. So basically it was the image of our state with the rings positioned over the town in question, and text denoting their wedding date. I thought it was cute, and I was happy for her, but what happened next surprised me and made me slightly uncomfortable. She, her bridesmaid, and another heavily tattooed member of the bridal party each sit in a chair, and had artists coming to tattoo them. I knew even as I was asking that it was no coincidence, but I figured I had to ask. "Oh, are you guys getting tattoos today too?" They laughed as though it were obvious, and the maid of honor said, "Of course." And worse, from the prep the artists were doing, they appeared to be getting them on their wrists, the same place as the bride, a highly visible spot, not easily covered up when you don't feel like reminiscing about your friend's wedding. I thought, well, this is getting out of control. What if they grow apart later in life and aren't friends with her? What if my brother and this chick break up? But hey, their bodies, their choice. And they'd evidently been directly involved in the design, so they must be comfortable with the imagery. I figured I'd keep up with my so-far winning strategy of staying out of it. The win streak was about to grind to a halt, just as I was about to retreat into the shadows on my phone to Google how long do tattoos take, because I wanted to know what kind of wait I was in for. The bride called out, "Us three are first, and I think you can go in the second or third round if you have a preference. No one except Julie has a time constraint." It took me a second to wrap my mind around what she said, and even still, I didn't get it. I was like, "Sure, go where?" "Go next." "Okay, at what?" I wasn't playing dumb, it just genuinely hadn't occurred to me yet that this could really be what she meant. The maid of honor, who was already getting pretty fed up with me even prior to this, whined, "You haven't read any of our recent emails, have you?" And I was getting pretty cagey at this point, wanting to be sure nothing was accidentally permanently affixed to me. So I was up front where I would have otherwise been tactful. "No, I haven't. Why? What did they say?" "We're getting the tattoos today." I was still lost. A kernel of realization was beginning to pop in my mind, and I was still frantically searching for an answer that led to anything else. "Okay, gotcha, great. So do you want me to, take photos or get you drinks, something like that?" Finally realizing how out of the loop on this plan I was, the bride spelled it out for me. "No, we're getting the tattoo today. We're all going to have matching tattoos." It was, in the top 5 items on my wish list. I thought she was joking. I hadn't known her to exercise any real sense of humor to that point, but I still figured either she was joking, I was being hazed, or she was out of her mind. So I exclaimed, laughing, "Wow, keep wishing. I'm not getting a tattoo." I looked around at some of the other bridesmaids who didn't have any tattoos themselves and realized they were really going to do this. They were going to have one tattoo on their body in a highly visible location, and it was going to be a kitschy memento of a friend's wedding just to appease this woman. Remember, some weren't even her family. One was actually just a co-worker. I'm guessing the bride was her boss and that she didn't know what she was getting into when she agreed, or she would have bailed at the outset. So I turned to the bridesmaids, who seemed reticent, because I had no issue with people who wanted to get at doing it. Just because I thought it was royally stupid doesn't make it any of my business, and said, "You know, you don't have to do this, right? We've gone above and beyond as bridesmaids, and if you don't want a tattoo, you do not have to get one. We can get temporary images or henna, or even, hear me out, not do this one thing on the list considering we've done literally everything else." The bride started saying something to the effect of, "You ungrateful bitch, that's it, you're out of here." But neither she nor the bridesmaid could leap up from the chair because, although the tattooing itself hadn't commenced, they were doing some other sort of drawing on them to prepare. The maid of honor started cursing me out, saying I'd been a downer from the start, and it figures I wouldn't want to share in the tradition or make any sacrifices, and on, not to mention the good deal of money I'd spent to that point. Was it not a sacrifice? I think the maid of honor was also preparing to cut her losses, because she pretty quickly changed tactics for shaming me about not getting a tattoo to commemorate a bridal party of a woman I barely know, into trying to create an in-group, out-group dynamic that guaranteed my exodus didn't contaminate any of the women having doubts. I went back and forth with the maid of honor for a minute, but then the bride started crying about how I'd ruined everything by not getting the tattoo. Another member of the party cut in and said she might want to think about the tattoo for another day or two before going through with it. I don't know if it's because she was genuinely having doubts, or because the whole situation was so awkward she just wanted an excuse to extricate herself, but I suspect a combination. The bride and her maid of honor reacted with such shock and horror, you think she had said she was pregnant by the groom. They told her she was disloyal and scummy, and what's more, that if she didn't do it now, they wouldn't give her the design to use for getting it done later. Luckily, someone from the shop, the oldest person there, so I think maybe the shop owner, cut in and said she couldn't help but overhear, and she wouldn't let any of her artists work on someone who was clearly having doubts. She decided that everyone except the three already in the chairs, because they came in totally confident, unlike those of us in the gallery, would have to come back another time. Cue hysterical ranting from the bride as soon as she got home about how I conspired to sabotage her wedding. My brother stepped in for me and patiently explained, like an adult talking to a developmentally delayed toddler, that my sister can't require members of her bridal party to get tattoos. Her response was to accuse him of being in on the sabotage. I got a long, unsurprising, profanity-laden Facebook message from the maid of honor later that week, informing me that I was out of the bridal party, and the worst thing to happen since Hitler. Yes, this came from a fully grown adult woman who holds a regular job and manages her own affairs. I didn't respond. I kept my brother up to speed, and I could tell he was getting pretty fed up with the wedding planning too. The run, hide, wait strategy might be genetic because it was his response to her insanity as well as mine, and it was not passing the test of time. He swears she was nothing like this when they were dating, or even when they were celebrating the engagement. To his credit, he did mention shortly after wedding planning began that she seemed to be changing for the worse, but still I have a hard time believing all of this is wholly Bridezilla syndrome. I got an update from my beleaguered brother that 4 of the girls did not return for the matching tattoos. 3 who did backed out at the last minute when the guy who'd kicked us out before gave them a thorough questionnaire as to whether or not they were really up to the commitment, and 1 more actually got it done. I'll skip the rest of the gory details, though there are quite a few, and say the wedding day eventually came. The bride or her minions tried to sit me in the back of the singles table, and she got into a shouting match with my brother. Well, not really a match, as he wasn't shouting back, about ruining the day and disrespecting her wishes when he moved me, his sister, back to the family table to eat with him and my parents. I let it go and tried not to mention this ordeal or my resulting feelings about her too frequently, out of respect for my brother. They stayed married for 3.5 years before lockdown forced them to confront the relationship's underlying problems, and they finally divorced a few months into COVID. Turns out, it was not all Bridezilla syndrome. He wanted to split everything 50-50 and make a clean break despite the fact that he'd earned 80% of the money during their marriage. Instead, she took him to court and dragged it out for months. It's only just been settled, and I've been having a ball retelling this story as we celebrate. To be fair, I guess she will need some cash on hand. You know, for the tattoo removal. 2. This was a few years ago, pre-COVID, the evening of my bridal shower. The event took place in a large hotel banquet room, separated from the grand ballroom by partitions. We were told that there was a Christian convention next to us during the day, but that they end their day around 5 p.m. and my event started at 6:30. Background: I'm from mixed Mediterranean background, which includes my mom's side being Middle Eastern, Levantine. My husband's family are mainly Greek, and no one's religious except my mom and my mother-in-law, Orthodox Light I call it. This is important to the story, as you will hear. My bridal shower had about 165 people, mainly my family members and women from my husband's family. Bridal showers in our culture can span traditional ceremonies to modern-day programs with games, etc. We did the first 2 hours with traditional gold-giving, folk dance. Levantine folk music is loud, has bagpipes, and lots of drumming. The stomping is also loud, especially with 165 people predominantly in heels. It was late fall. I had on a traditional velvet dress that was several pounds in weight and heavy. I would eventually change out of it into an evening gown and come back. Some women from the convention had seen me earlier, paused and stared at me as I checked on the room before 6. They probably had not seen traditional attire like ours, and I thought they were leaving their banquet room. They had banners and everything that even my guests could read on their way in, but it didn't bother me as the party was all inside. After 45 minutes of our music playing, sometime around 7:30, one of the female hotel reps informs the DJ to turn down our music because the convention next door was praying. I didn't know about this, but the entitled people had complained and stalked the reps about our event. They had begun to harass my guests that went into the women's bathroom. Finally, my niece got freaked out after they cornered her, and I walked outside to 2 entitled women waiting for me.
Look, we want to apologize for the confusion.
The hotel management really did your event and ours a disservice.
You mean for how you stalked my family and guests in the bathroom?
We just want to show you how sorry we are with a small gift.
They proceeded to hand me some hyper-religious bag of everything Jesus-y. I reluctantly grabbed it, and cue my mother-in-law, who is a saint, but lived all her life around people trying to convert her to their denomination. My mother-in-law begins to question their behavior, they get defensive, and finally it ends with, "Why are you giving us pamphlets on the Bible?"
We want to invite you to the upcoming convention.
My mother-in-law was bewildered. "We are Greek Orthodox. We don't bother Jesus, especially with the likes of you. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're going back to celebrate." I dropped the bag on an empty table, and my mother-in-law pushed everyone back inside and closed the doors behind her. By the time we left that night, all their banners and the bag were gone. 3. Okay, so this happened in 1990. My then fiancé, 18 male, and I, 19 and female, lived in a small town in Kentucky at the time, and I had gotten the money together for the marriage license, so we headed over to City Hall to get it. At the time, both of us were naive about a lot of things. So we are standing at the license desk, and they mention that there is a judge just across the hall. We're thinking, great. Since we don't have a pastor to perform the ceremony, we can make arrangements with the judge. So once we have the license in hand, we head over. The second we walk in the door, the secretary says, "License." We looked at each other, shrugged, and handed her the license. She starts typing and we sit down. About 15 to 20 minutes later, she gets up without having said anything to us and steps out into the hall. When she comes back, there is another couple with her. We figured that couple had an appointment before us. She takes them directly into the judge's chamber and closes the door. When she comes out about 5 minutes later, she says,
"The judge will see you now."
As she leans over the desk and grabs some papers, we glance at each other and shrug. I figure the other couple left via the back way, so the secretary leads us in. Much to our surprise, the other couple is there standing on the side of the judge.
"Who's ready to get married?"
asks the judge with a huge grin before we can say anything. We stop, stand still, look at each other, giggle, shrug and reply, "Sure, why not?" And that is how I accidentally eloped. We ended up divorcing 6 years later, and with 2 kids, but I still grin when I tell the story of my elopement. 4. I actually had a plan for my 34 female second wedding to a great guy, also 34 and male. We had been together since January 2005. Come the beginning of October 2005, I knew he was the one, and I asked him to marry me. I figured we lived in Memphis, Tennessee now. I'm sure I could get certain things together for a Halloween wedding. So in less than 28 days, I had made arrangements with our priest and a haunted house to get married on October 31st, in the haunted house's front windows so the waiting crowd could watch. Our priest and the haunted house waived any fee. The haunted house even let our wedding party go through first with their Beetlejuice guide first that night. They even posed a set of skeletons dressed as a bride and groom embracing in a handmade coffin. My mother had passed away in December of 2004 and had been cremated. She had picked out a plastic teddy bear cookie jar for her final resting place. They let me put her on the altar for the ceremony. They were awesome people. I found a cake lady who went above and beyond with a Black Widow coffin cake, red velvet flavored. She also made my southern husband a red velvet skull groom's cake. She didn't stop there, she also donated a full sheet cake, half chocolate, half vanilla, decorated to look like a graveyard, to the haunted house's charity to sell at the wedding for extra donations. I found a dress online, silver. It was my second wedding. When it arrived, it was almost better than I could hope for. At the time, in my eyes, it looked like a liquid silver, so I was happy. Anyway, someone had told a local radio station about our plans to marry on Halloween in a haunted house and given them my email address. My husband and I talked it over and eventually agreed. So 6 a.m. on October 31st, our phone rang and they interviewed us about our wedding. We catered our own reception, so we still had the cooking to do. When it was time, we headed over to the haunted house. So wedding party is my fiancé, who has asked my oldest to be his best kid, and is dressed as a kilt-wearing seafarer. My oldest was dressed as a huntsman. I, who has asked my youngest to be my kid of honor, and am dressed in the silver dress and a straitjacket. My youngest was dressed as grandma. My one bridesmaid was dressed as Little Red Riding Hood, and her husband, who was also an usher, was dressed as a big bad wolf, complete with articulated wolf's head that he made. He was also my ex-husband, the man from story number 3 there, so yeah. The part that everyone we've told this story to likes the most is our priest came, unbeknownst to us, dressed as a New Orleans-style voodoo death. All in all, it was a lot of work, but a lot of fun. The haunted house had a photographer that took pictures of our wedding for us, and the haunted house people ended up using our wedding pics on their website for years later. 5. My husband and I were married on a crisp October day, with leaves changing and the bricks of the church warm and faded. A perfect backdrop for pictures taken hours before the ceremony. Turned out great. Loved our photographer. We got married in my husband's church. He's a third-generation Methodist, and while he's not super religious, it was nice to have a piece of his family's history incorporated into the day. The church is beautiful. One of those old brick styles with stained glass windows in the chapel. I could tell you about the rush to find a wedding dress because the one my mother and I got on a sale a year ago was now too small, and not even my soon-to-be mother-in-law's seamstress skills could fix it. I could tell you of the mad dash to the bridal store where my husband's mother kindly bought my dress, let me choose it, and only suggested certain styles because they'd be more flattering. I'm curvy, but always found something positive to say about any dress I come out in. I could tell you how we got our rings 2 weeks before our wedding, because the original ring plan fell through. How my hair was done in a very pretty way, but not at all how we'd planned. I think it came out better that way too. How my mother kept getting teary-eyed, but my sister and I both planned on that and had stashes of tissues everywhere. How both my dad and my husband coordinated handing me off, so when I tripped on the stairs one of them could catch me. How we left our reception after an hour to play video games with our friends as our honeymoon. It was awesome. How all of us forgot to have Dad take off his hat for half the pictures, so he's there in his suit and his camo ball cap. Or I could tell you about the reception. We decided to have the reception downstairs for 3 reasons. It was cheap, convenient, and no alcohol was allowed on the premises. A good section of my husband's family are religious non-drinkers, very nice folks. And the rest are used to it, so it wasn't a big deal. On his side. My side is a big reason we chose a venue with no drinking allowed. A good portion of my family are alcoholics, very few in recovery, and they get loud and more than a little vulgar. There's a bar down the road if anyone needed a drink. Now, shortly before I got married, I was getting ready in one of the rooms at the church. My mom was helping me, and my husband's sister was playing keeper of the door to prevent people from wandering in. My mother, mother-in-law, and my husband's grandmother all had lovely wrist corsages. A surprise my sister-in-law worked out with our florist. Problems 1 and 2. My aunt, who insisted she could have one since she raised me, and kept trying to get into the room I was getting ready in. Eventually my cousin got her mom upstairs and sat down. Great, no more hiccups. Right? Nope. Ceremony went down beautifully. Dad made sure hubby had a firm grip of my arm before he let me go up the 3 stairs, smart man, and when asked who gave the bride away, clearly said, "Her mother and I do," because he wanted mom to feel included. My stepdad is getting along with my dad. He doesn't grumble when dad sits on the other side of her. Everyone is doing great. Cue the reception. I'd been fielding complaints about there not being a bar and the no alcohol rule from the beginning. By now, everyone is here. The rules haven't changed. Deal with it. Everyone's drinking their soda and sparkling cider, chatting. We cut our little cake, have our receiving line, mingle a little with the guests, and then I hear it. My aunt is saying we had the reception here so my mother couldn't drink. Her new husband is openly ogling my mom and making remarks about her threesome. He's also staring at my 16-year-old sister and commenting how it'd just be a couple more years. He's careful to do this outside of her father's hearing. He is not careful to do this outside of Jesse's hearing. Jesse is in his dress whites, dashing and protective, who's brushed off my sister's crush on him and treats her like the kid she is. Jesse, without hesitation, offers to escort my new uncle to the bar so he won't get lost trying to find it. I heard later a few people wandered down there, my aunt among them. No fights, no broken noses, just one Marine very firmly suggesting the gross new uncle get the fuck out. Oh, and Jesse confirming that the little diamond chips in my ring were in fact diamonds. None of us question how he knows. He just does. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Stresses and Dresses, Wedding Hijinks, number 4. And thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do like and subscribe. I will not pressure you to comment. If you're not into that sort of thing, I know, it's a big responsibility expressing yourself publicly. But if you do it, I appreciate it. Right, what day is this? This will be Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday. This is August, isn't it? Yes, it is. I'll need to remember to pay my bills tomorrow. I was going to do it on Sunday, but I forgot. But that's fine. I'll do it tomorrow. That's fine. Okay, right, middle of the week. So that means I'm recording these at the start of the week. So it means it's probably a busy Hellfreezer day today. Well, it was a busy Hellfreezer day. So I'm going to head off for now. Get the videos made. Then I can set things in motion to get the next videos made. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.